At 5:03 a.m., my health insurance app buzzed with a cheery banner that did not belong to my life. The notification congratulated me on a newborn delivery at Aurora St. Luke's in Q-Day and attached an explanation of benefits that listed charges under my policy, my name, and a maternity room number I could have driven to without a map. The newborn wasn't mine, the mother wasn't my wife, and the app insisted I had already signed digital consents at 9:47 p.m, while my son slept 10 feet from my chair in the humidifier hissed like a tired kettle. Shock does a dumb thing to time. I pressed my thumb to the phone, opened the URB, and stared at the headers until they separated into language again. The line items were ordinary in their way: room and board, epidural, newborn screening, but nothing about it was ordinary from me. My wife, Mara, lay in our bed in Bayview, our little brick bungalow off Kinnikinnick Avenue, breathing the slow rhythm of a person who believed the world would still be there when she woke. I put on a hoodie and sat at the kitchen table under a dented pendant light we bought at a salvage place on Florida Street during a weekend that had felt like a future worth counting on. Our routine used to be easy to list. I run a small screen printing shop in Walker's Point, the kind of place that smells like ink and citrus cleaner, where soccer clubs and neighborhood bars come for shirts, and craft breweries want their logos to look like they were up cool. A few years back, when the world learned to buy things from couches, I added an online storefront for custom tote runs and made volume orders from indie publishers. On paper, it was a tidy life. Mara sells pharmaceuticals to clinics and hospital systems, driving a route that drifts between Kenosha, Racine, Wauwatosa, and Madison, her company car rolling lunch counter of protein bars and half-drunk coffees. The schedule is a mess of breakfasts with office managers and mid-afternoon in services. She stays overnight sometimes when the week stacks weird. We have a 7-year-old son who treats South Shore Park like his extra backyard, and a hand-me-down bike we keep promising to fix properly. Money is what you think about when you love people and agree to bills bigger than your chest feels in the bad hour just before light. My mother needed a new knee and then a second round of physical therapy because the first clinic moved her too fast. The out-of-pocket portion was a slow squeeze I wasn't ready for. Our roof had a spring tantrum and fed a leak down the dining room wall. I paid a roofer who smiled like he had seen men pretend to understand flashing. We took an SBA disaster loan during the leanest lockdown months, and we were still paying it like a penance. My son's asthma shows up in late summer when you can smell the algae on the lake. The inhaler copy makes you feel like breathing is a luxury. None of this was catastrophic. It just set the table for bad news to sit at comfortably. The first red flag came wearing a scent. Mara used to smell like hotel soap and peppermint gum, the way road people do. Then a cedar note showed up, the kind of woodsy perfume that lingers even after a wash. She told me her company gave away sample lotions at a sales summit. The second flag was quieter. A 6-digit passcode on her phone after years of lazy thumbprints, explained as an IT crackdown. The third was a trick of lights. Our Nest Hello on the porch began to blink off in tidy gaps, 10 to 20 minutes at a time, most often on Mara's midweek home nights. A firmware update banner would explain the blackout, but the timing always sat on the same shelf as her claim to be charting expense reports at the kitchen island. I opened the Aurora app from the EOB and traced the breadcrumb the way insurers lay them out when they want to break you gently. The digital consent carried a signature that looked like mine at first pass and not at all like mine when I put it beside the way I signed for checks. The IP address recorded for the e-sign matched our home network Comcast brittle string of numbers that I could recite if asked. The timestamp said 9:47 p.m, which is when I was on the floor with Lego towers and my son was telling me his gym teacher had a whistle that sounded like a bird in distress. I sent a message through the app's secure portal saying there had been a mistake. No birth in this family. Please review. Please flag. I screenshotted everything because screenshots are a poor man's paper trail. I drove to the First Bank branch on Kinnikinnick the minute it opened because the EOB had listed a copay that suggested a card linked to my HSA had already been dipped. The branch manager recognized me because I bring deposits in person like an old man who enjoys saying good morning to humans. She pulled up the HSA, found 2 pending charges to Aurora under my member ID, and placed a forward lock without making a face that suggested she had opinions about my life. She printed a sticky with the case number and slid it across the desk. FB-98,144 and suggested I file a police report because it is what people in banks say when someone else's haste has written your day. I thanked her for being part of a world where numbers can be frozen and walked out into a morning that looked like a fresh sheet of paper just before the market bleeds. When I got back, my son asked if we could still go to his friend's birthday at the indoor trampoline place on Harrow after school. I said yes because children deserve a calendar that does what it promised. Mara texted me a heart and said she had an early start toward Racine and then Kenosha, that she might grab a hotel if the drive back looked messy. I told myself that life is an overlay of truths and that people like me, people who fix misprints for a living and reburn screens when the emotion does a tiny bubble, are patient on purpose. I told myself I would ask Mara to sit with me and look at the paper together when the sun didn't feel like a fluorescent bulb. I had orders to pull in shirts to box, so I went to the shop and let my hands do what they were trained to do. The CSU soccer club needed a reprint because a sponsor changed the logo. A bar on National Avenue wanted the new batch to read opening at noon like a declaration. A charity run forgot they changed their brand colour and everything printed to navy until I corrected it. Courier drivers wandered in and out with that practice speed that keeps honks to a minimum. Mid-afternoon, I drove 2 boxes to a clinic by the lakefront on a whim that had been building for days. I asked the receptionist if their farmer rep from Mara's company had been by for the scheduled lunch. She said the lunch had been cancelled because the rep had a family emergency and was scheduled for next week, and she said it kindly because she has a face for bad news. I am not a snooper by nature. I have become a man who opens drawers like they contain knives. Mara used to keep a keyring that looks like a small steel loop with minimal fobs. Anuki had joined the group sometime last month, slender and stamped with numbers that scream storage unit or key drop. The charges on our joint card had a fresh recurring line at $34.99 each first of the month for a place called Bay Storage South Shore. I drove along the lakefront where Gull Silk and turned into a row of orange rollout doors like every storage place in America. The clerk wore a hoodie and the one expression of someone who knows that everyone who looks like me is about to ask for something not technically allowed. I asked if there were any maintenance advisories for units under my wife's maiden name. The clerk shrugged, flipped a screen, and said I needed to be on the account. I turned polite and vague and construction worker casual, and when he went to the back room, I stared at the ledger and the unit number until my memory created a photograph. I will admit this because it is the only part of this story that makes me feel like a person I do not love. I used to cut keys in my shop in a back alcove as a favour to restaurant owners whose landlords still like brass. I know what the generic storage cylinder lock does when it meets a standard bypass tool. Unit B-112 rolled up with a clatter that always sounds like a cheap decision. Inside, an unassuming set of bins labelled with masking tape and Morris-landed hand. Winter coats, Christmas, kid clothes, samples. A pelican case sat at the back like a small, square threat. Inside the case, not guns or cash, which would be too easy, but a prepaid iPhone still shrink-wrapped, an hour-ring box from a local jeweler on Downer Avenue with a receipt for a size that would bite a knuckle, a lease packet for an apartment at a new building on the Kinnickinnic River called Harborline Flats, and an access fob with HL etched into the plastic. The lease named Mara and someone with the last name Klein. The move-in had been 3 weeks ago. The rent amount matched none of our budgets. The world has a way of snapping its fingers and making your days shorter. Our son needed picking up at Bayview Montessori at 3:10. He bounded out with his backpack slapping and asked if we could invite his friend Ben over. The answer in my chest hurt, and I made a terrain check he didn't notice. At home, I fed him grapes and pretzels and pretended to answer emails about shirt sizes while staying to lease with my wife's name and a stranger's. At 6:02, my neighbour texted to ask if my gutter guy had done freebies lately or if that was just a rumour. He included a photograph of my house, our porch light, and part of my front yard, captured by his new Arlo camera because he is a person who cannot not point cameras at things. His clip had a timestamp 9:58 p.m., 2 nights prior, and a little shadow in the corner where my nest hello lives. In his clip, someone wearing a hoodie and moving with my wife's ballerina-adjacent economy sit along our east wall to the exterior breaker, flipped a small switch I had labelled doorbell like a dad, and then walked out of the shop, my nest going blind within seconds. 29 minutes later, the figure returned and flipped it back. The Nest app's update banners for that night lined up like theatre call times. I did not turn over the house that night. I watched my son bounce himself to sleep in a nest of blankets while I sat on the hallway runner and counted the way his chest rose. I typed a letter to myself like people used to in legal dramas when they needed to fix a moment in time, 5:03 a.m. EUB, Aurora St. Luke's, room 312, my policy number, someone's baby 10:17 a.m, bank code 1:54 p.m, storage unit 6:2 p.m, neighbor camera 9:58 p.m. Breaker, list of numbers. I wrote my wife a note soft and spare put it in an envelope on her pillow and crawled into the bed like a man who doesn't trust wood to hold him. Mara came home smelling like cedar and the artificial orange of gummy vitamins. She moved like she wanted the morning to restart without talking about anything. She told me she had a full day up in Wauwatosa and planned to stay at a courtyard in Brookfield because she had an early meeting with a practice that insisted on breakfast time. She kissed our son's forehead and told him to keep up with his reading chart. She asked me if we had milk. I thought of the inherited advice my father gave me about shafts and screws. Talk is nothing without thread. Patience is the only way a bolt seats. I said I needed to drive to Kenosha in the morning to drop a run at a new brewery. That was true. I wondered if people avoid truth when a lie feels like a curt. The public scene came 2 days later because a block had a winter potluck, the kind of Bayview night where someone strings lights along the garage and everyone warms their hands over foil pans with questionable casseroles. I brought a manila folder the way a person brings banana bread. I spoke to the small group gathered under a strand of Edison bulbs about porch cameras and breaker boxes and the trick our block had seen lately with doorbells going blind. Then I set a redacted printout of the Aurora ERB on the fold-out table, the case number from First Bank tape flagged, and I mentioned title fraud and HSA fraud in the abstract. I said that if anyone named me as a contact, they should call me first. People nodded because nodding is what neighbors do to show they are listening. Someone asked about the best camera for porches. Someone offered a ring install as business card and told me he liked Wise Cam better on price. A man poured me a beer and asked quietly if I was okay. I said I ran a shop and had to make deadlines, which was both answer and dodge. Reveals rounded the corner without invitation. At noon the next day, a billing specialist from Aurora called and left a voicemail to confirm the secondary contact for the newborn, a Mr. Klein, whose phone number ended in digits that matched an email address in the Harborline lease. A minute later, a text came through to our joint cart asking to verify a new authorized user added to a retail account attached to a furniture store chain near the Riverwalk. The new user's name was M. Klein. I called, removed the user, and placed a password on the account that did not have meaning to anyone but me and a math teacher from 8th grade who once told me never to pick numbers attached to birth dates. While I was on hold, the school nurse emailed a form to update emergency contacts. Mara had filled one out that morning, adding a guardian with an address at Harborline Flats and a note that he could pick up our son on Wednesdays. The nurse is a person I've known long enough to know her email voice. The question marks were silent behind her words. I drove to my lawyer's office on Water Street with a folder and the feeling of someone who didn't reserve enough time on the meter. The receptionist knew the look. She has seen men bring their lives in folders, and she has seen women do it with nicer tabs. The lawyer read my pages with pencil marks that made me feel like a paper I could pass. He asked me to list what I wanted, not what I feared. I told him I wanted to separate finances without setting fire to our son's week. I wanted written rules about who can pick him up. And I wanted a protective order that froze any medical or financial account that could be used with my name in strange rooms. He drafted a petition for legal separation with temporary orders, an emergency motion to restrain new joint debt and new medical consents, and a letter to Aurora requesting the audit trail for the e-consent under HIPAA with my signature asserting fraud. He wrote a letter to the school about our pickup protocol and included a code word hardly anyone could guess because it meant nothing to anyone but a boy and a secretly selfish father. He gave me copies of everything stamped with the case reference F-Aminus 2025-11,822 and told me to initial checkboxes like I was building something with steps. When you start doing paperwork to make a life smaller and safer, your body rebels in boring ways. My heart tugged sideways like a puzzle piece one afternoon when I was burning a screen. The urgent care doctor checked my EKG, nodded at a clean stripe of electricity, and told me to hydrate and sleep. In the waiting room, a man with a baby in a car seat smiled in the universal dad language. I stared at the tiny sock and thought of the Aurora ERB with a baby who was on my plan and not in my house. The moral math was ungenerous, and I told myself to do better than a ledger. The independent witness who made one corner line up came from the least dramatic place. The Harborline Flats mailboxes live in a bank of brushed metal behind a glass door I could see through if I pressed my face to it like a child. The mail carrier is a woman with a well-known route who once came into my shop to get a shirt for a charity run. She recognized me and asked me how business was. I asked her, As a man who understands how much people see when they walk the same beats, where their packages get misdelivered often, and if Harborside has had issues. She said the tenant in 3C, the number on my wife's lease, gets a lot of medical-looking envelopes and a baby registry box or two had come last week. She did not know who the roommate was, but she sometimes saw a man carry a white and ink-shaped thing with a smile used for neighbours and nothing else. She said all of this with the practiced small talk of someone who wants to help without stepping into anyone's fire. Mara insisted that Harborside was a model unit she had access to because she worked with clinics that referred patients to the building's concierge for short stays. She said the ring receipt was because I had lost my band during a job and she wanted to replace it. She said the Nest was probably misbehaving because the firmware on the things is always trash. She said the EOB belonged to a billing error. She said the school nurse needed to calm down because we could coordinate pickups like two brain cells rubbing together. She said the perfume came from samples. She said the unit charges were an accounting code her company uses to track contras. Gaslighting is an ugly word people on the internet throw around like a dodgeball, but it is accurate sometimes. She told me I was making dots connect in a picture that wasn't there. I told her the breaker doesn't flip itself. The public scene that Matt had left no room for theatre. I met with the principal at our son's school at a regular parent-teacher afternoon where teachers put student drawings on little metal clips on the wall. I brought a printed, redacted copy of the Aurora consent with the IP address circled and the first bank case letter with the investigator's name highlighted. I said I was not there to embarrass anyone. I just needed to place a hard stop between adult chaos and a kid who needs a predictable handoff. In the hallway, a row of winter animal collages with cotton ball snow listened to a grown man ask for a code word protocol like he was ordering a sandwich. The principal thanked me for being proactive and made a note that felt like a seatbelt. Other parents pretended to look at construction paper mittens. Social pressure makes people speak louder above heart. More reveals arrived like a drummer with trouble keeping time. A credit card we kept for emergencies came through with the hotel charge at the Iron Horse, a place done by the Harley Museum with rooms you don't need unless your bed elsewhere needs a break. The timestamp overlapped with the Nest blackout and the neighbour's camera. The pharma company's HR emailed in response to my lawyer's letter and confirmed Mara had not been in Brookfield for an early breakfast, nor had she logged the Kenosha stay in her expeds report. In fact, she had claimed the Milwaukee parking receipt for $6 at 9:41 p.m. that night. The Harborline manager, when prompted by my lawyer's subpoena, provided a copy of the executed lease and the co-occupant's driver's license, a man in his early 40s with a wrist tattoo visible near the coffin, a smile meant for professional photographs, employed as a physician assistant at Aurora St. His last name was Klein. The baby clothes on the registry list matched the brand my printer had run a logo for last month. I wondered if I had printed the bag that carried my own humiliation out of a store. The moral fork felt less like a fork and more like a ladder with two uneven rungs. I could file criminal charges for forged deconsent and HSA fraud and let prosecutors do their unlovely work, and my son could sit one day in a court hallway playing Sudoku on a phone while adults said problem words, or I could let civil orders hold and refuse to move any further unless a line got crossed where money leaves my control or a child leaves school without both of us agreeing. I chose a fence over a sword. People like neat endings when they aren't in them. I chose mess with a gate. I drew boundaries like chalk lines on a gym floor. I froze the joint card and unlocked a basic, low-limit card in my name and put a hard monthly cap in the app like I was teaching myself a lesson I didn't deserve. I moved utilities into my name with new deposits and put the receipts in a folder labeled boring, because that was the energy I wanted. I opened a savings account for my son as custodian and put $25 in it like a seed, not because money fixes grief, but because planting even a dumb tree beats staring at a stump. I emailed Mara a list of rules I wanted in writing. No bringing anyone to pick up our son. No adding names to the school without both of us. No new debts. No new medical consents touching my policy. I screenshot the read receipt and then closed the phone so I wouldn't stare at Dot and think it was a promise. The judge assigned to our temporary orders looked like a person you'd want choosing between two bad escalators. He read the filings, looked at the audit trails, and set a schedule that locked handoffs into the Washington Park Pavilion because kids do better when geese are nearby. He prohibited any changes to school medical files absent both signatures. He enjoined both of us from incurring new debts on anything joint. He froze the HSA card in the court's language until an investigator at Aurora finished realigning records. He ordered a co-parenting class because courts are in love with evidence of learning. He wrote an admonition at the end that saved me from my worst instincts, no speaking to the child about adult matters. I am a person who can follow instructions when they are spoken like a tool list. At co-parenting class, a man in a polo explained in a video that messages should be about logistics and not therapy, that kids love routine more than explanations, that adults should type like they are writing to a colleague they don't trust but don't hate. I watched the slides and took the quiz and uploaded my certificate like a boy who cleans his room because someone somewhere is keeping score. The app we were required to use looks like a calendar you would hate until it ends fights, color-coded and aggressively neutral. I submitted half the soccer fee for reimbursement with a scanned receipt, green check confirming like a gentle robot. Twice, in the weeks that followed, CPS called because someone reported that our son had been left alone for 2 hours while I was at my shop and because someone said our home lacked heat on a cold day. CPS workers know the shape of weaponized concern. The woman who came by wore boots that could handle our stoop and a face that didn't flinch when my kid offered her a Lego he was proud of. She looked at my furnace filter and the thermostat and my son's bed with the superhero sheets and made notes. She looked at the school's email about new protocols and the judge's order and left with a card and a promise that this felt like a neighborly misunderstanding. She didn't say who called. She didn't have to. One night when snow did that quieting thing, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the street glow within blue like a screen you haven't touched yet. The nest pinged a person at the door. A crow had decided my doorbell was a rival and blinked at herself in the lens before flapping off like an irritated old man. The hum of the new porch light I installed ran just under my pulse. My phone was face down because it knows more than I should be allowed to know at night. A second EOB rolled into the app at 5:03 a.m. a week later. This one an auto notification for the HSA card unlocked pending investigator approval. It felt like a ghost repeating a joke I had not found funny the first time. I looked at the timestamp and pictured a nurse with a badge walking a corridor under fluorescent light and a man with a wrist tattoo swaddling someone small and unoffended by adults. The world contains too much nothing to be solved by one person's arithmetic. People want big moments. They get thumbnail-sized ones that somehow carry the weight. My son drew a map of our street, our house a square with a triangle roof, our neighbour's house with more windows because he likes the dog, and 2 tiny men drawn by our steps. He labelled them in blocky letters, Dad and me. He drew a line between the porch and the tree and shaded it blue. When I asked him what the line was, he said it was the path the snowplow made. He did not draw anyone else. He did not make that choice to comfort me. He drew what felt true to a kid with a pencil and a subject. Would you demand a DNA test now, when the facts point in directions that cross your money and shake your stomach? Or would you let whatever is forming over there be over there until a court or a bill insists on your formal notice? Would you push a criminal case for a forged medical consent and an HSA swipe that landed in a room where your name was printed on a band? Or would you hold the civil line and save the hammer for a roof that actually opens to weather? I have decided that my son is not a tennis ball. I am not a racket, and no other child who didn't ask for my last name needs my name on a phone to make my days cleaner. I will hold the fence. I will document the breaks. I will keep my hands busy and my mouth smaller than my heart. I still run shirts and shit boxes and wiping off squeegees until my fingerprints smell like solvents a little too long. I still stand at South Shore Park and pretend the lake is an ocean. Girls making fools of toddlers and adults who forget food tends to gravity. I still answer emails with kind words because we are a neighbourhood and neighbours are the only thing you can touch when the internet turns you into a character with someone else's opinion taped to your back. Mara lives in the city somewhere with elevators and a front desk. She sees our son on the schedule the court wrote, and sometimes we exchange at the pavilion with men in short shorts running past with dogs. She is gentle with him. That is what matters and what burns, and both can be true in a human body without anyone cracking it open. The last time the insurance app pinged at 5:03 a.m, it was a pharmacy refill for my son's inhaler, automatically approved, pick up today. The screen looked the same as the baby's did, bright letters, cheerful blue. I stood at the kitchen counter, phone in my hand, humidifier whispering like a tired house machine, and watched on Treat Bayview like it was going to be forgiven. The crow returned to the camera and did its pointless, beautiful inspection of its own face. The porch light hummed. I pressed my thumb to the app and marked the inhaler ready, then poured cereal into a bowl with a pattern of blue fish my son likes because he believes they are good at watching him fix his spoon. I do not have a twist to give you. I have a house with thin walls and a street that sticks when it snows and a boy who draws blue lines for plows. I have a stack of papers clipped to the fridge under a maggot shaped like the home bridge. I have a line on my porch that I do not let anyone cross without my say. I have a bird that thinks my doorbell is a friend or an enemy, depending on the day. I have a home I live with now that I did not choose, and sometimes, when the light hits right, it sounds like a held note and not a warning.